Welcome to the live show tonight, guys. I have a very, very special guest for you all. His name's Frank. He does war reenactments, military reenactments, you name it. Frank's the guy. I made that up today. But listen, guys, he's going to tell you a wee bit about himself, and then we're going to talk about the USS Cod, and I'm going to send some links out. So, without further ado, Frank, please tell us about yourself.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me the privilege to speak to you this evening, coming to you live and in person from the Cleveland, Ohio area vicinity. We're 5 hours difference from the UK. I am currently a substitute teacher. Prior to that, I worked 21 years in a hospital as a pharmacy technician. And prior to that, I worked as a dishwasher, and I worked myself through high school and college. I always had a love of camping and history, cooking over an open fire, drinking coffee from a tin cup. And so when the movie Gettysburg came out, I went to the local mall and I saw the movie Gettysburg. And lo and behold, in the front lobby were these guys, reenactors, standing there with their muskets stacked and whiskers and all that. And they said, "Well, you like camping? You like cooking over an open fire? You like traveling history? Well, why don't you join us?" And I said, "What does this all cost?" "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll lend you the stuff. We'll lend you the gear, and you'll have about a whole year to get it. And if you don't think it's your cup of tea, nothing lost." So I said, "Well, I'll think about it. Thank you. I'll think about it." This is about 91 or 92 when 91 when Gettysburg came out, the movie. And so I went home and thought about it. And I went back the next day, and another group of reenactors were there, and they kind of talked me into joining. So the first thing, one of my first events was Bentonville, North Carolina. I was a scuba diver before that as a hobby. I've been fortunate to be in Australia and Fiji and all around the world as a diver. I learned in college. I was a swimmer on the swim team. The year before, I'm laying on a beach with women in bikinis and beautiful sunshine and sand beneath my toes. And now I'm laying on the hard, cold ground with tubby bearded guys snoring to the left of me, farting to the right of me, and I'm freezing. I'm freezing, dressed in a t-shirt. I looked at the sky and I said, "Dear God, I think I made a mistake, but let me gratefully and respectfully bow out after this is over with. Please have me survive the weekend." So I survived that weekend. And for the life of me, I don't know why I continued this hobby. And that was 1992 and then 93. And I'm still considered a reenactor today. Um, it held my interest because whatever your interest happens to be, we as human beings and our life experience and journey on this earth have a myriad and a multitude of interests. This hobby satisfied all of that. So that led me to doing American Civil War in various different regiments. Um, it led me to be doing, I branched out into World War II, doing the British Home Guard, the Veterans Guard of Canada, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders, 51st Division Scottish. It led me to be U.S. Navy submariner on a submarine, and also buckskinner with a flintlock. So that's the Revolutionary War, French and Indian War period in this country. So I wanted to see what the whole gamut of experience was. I know that there are people who are doing Roman centurion, and they go, they actually uh, boil leather. The Romans would boil leather and make shields that would actually stop a bullet. It was so tough.
Mm-hmm.
They do Mycenaean warriors, the ancient Greeks. I mean, you name it. Medieval reenacting. So if you're thinking about reenacting, once this this COVID is over with. Remember, we
Yeah.
survived the bubonic plague,
Yeah,
right?
and we
And
survived World War Two.
you are survivors. 3/4 of Europe survived the bubonic plague. That means 75% of Europe were done. Your relatives, mine. But here we are. So you have what it takes. Don't forget that. Keep your chin up. I don't have to tell you from the UK because you helped us Yanks to get through too. It was a joint effort, and I do apologize for those Yanks who are oversexed over here.
There's a
And
there's probably quite a few relations running about. It's probably related to the
don't forget,
Americans just because of them.
I watched plenty of Dad's Army, so I learned everything I know about World War II UK from Dad's Army. So I'll entertain
Yeah,
you later.
that's great. I mean, you were talking about the Americans. I mean, look at you ever seen the film Saving Private Ryan? I mean, you've got the beaches in Normandy. That was just terrible. I mean, some of them didn't even get the chance to get off the boat.
No, they would take one step, and their uniforms and gear would weight them down, and they would sink and drown just like that. The Germans had intelligence, and they actually knew they had the high ground, and they were ready and prepared. Even though they used some of the Canadians on the edges as diversions, and they
Yeah.
took tremendous, horrible hits.
Yes.
They used that as and but so the Germans, some of them abandoned their guns and ran for it,
Yeah.
but the other ones at the beginning, it was a slaughter.
Yes.
These poor guys were stepping off the landing craft, and before they could even get anywhere,
Hmm.
would be dead.
I mean, you also had the tanks too, the Shermans that could float, but some of them didn't make it either because they're still finding them to this day. Tanks that have sunk, which is
And being
amazing.
when I was in high school, I had a very nice history teacher. His name was Mr. Chortis at Mayfield High School, and I liked Mr. Chortis, and he was interesting. I saw the Why We Fight series by Frank Capra, who went on about the German Empire and the Japanese Empire, and it wanted to be a motivational film to
Hmm.
show Americans why we need to get involved with this, why this is important to save democracy, to save Europe, to save
Yes.
the world. And we were late in getting in because you British were there very early on, fighting all alone with no help at all, watching Europe fall one country at a time
I do
until
think, yeah, I do
finally they.
think, yeah, he's come in. I mean, I do think if the Americans had never come in, we would have been conquered quite easily.
Now remember,
You know,
I'm a pretender. Don't give any praise to me. I am only doing this because it's fun, and I have, like you, relatives that we try to honor them.
yes,
A lot of them are gone today. We lose over 2,000 veterans in the United States every year
yeah,
from natural causes. They're old, and so eventually there'll be no more. Just like when the band played Waltzing Matilda. If
yeah,
you've ever heard of that song by Eric Bogle,
yeah,
there'll be one day there'll be no Waltzing Matilda for me.
yes,
And we used to sing that. I'm a member of Celtic Union Band, so if you look that up on Twitter, Reverb Nation, YouTube, and Facebook, we kind of broke up last March because of this COVID thing and other issues as well. But
hmm,
I had a good run, about 10 years. We're not real professionals, but we had a lot of fun. We saw Irish, Scottish, English, and non-ASCAP music for anyone listening. That is, goes centuries back. And we try to honor those people who sung those songs. Your
yes,
ancestors, don't forget them. They love you, and if they looked at you today and they saw your clean clothes and your smooth faces
hmm,
and your health and your kindness and your families, they would hug and kiss you so much. They would be so proud of you.
hmm,
That's why they sacrificed for me, for you, for all of us. Don't forget. Learn from their mistakes. Learn from what they did right, and don't hold grudges. Don't be angry. Don't be quick to fight. Learn that we study history so we could learn from the mistakes of others. We don't
yes,
repeat the mistakes that they made in the past. That's
yes.
a,
Never
a note
forget
to
them.
remember.
Never forget them. And especially with the ones that are just got to be serving, especially the ones that are serving right now, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, everything. keeping us safe, guys. You know. But I must say, shall we start talking about the submarine? I can't
Ah,
wait.
yes.
I've
Well,
got somebody here who wants to ask you questions, but when you go first, tell us about the submarine.
well, I'm a Civil War reenactor, and I spent since 1992. I was quartermaster sergeant, and a quartermaster sergeant is in charge of uniforms, equipment, gear.
Yeah,
Commissaries was in charge of the food, and ordnance was in charge of the guns and bullets and all that.
yeah,
Well, a quartermaster sergeant didn't have field command as a sergeant, but he was in charge in the camp. He would have to be the first one there after the battle with cigars and brandy for the officers, with tent and equipage for the non-coms, and food and other medical supplies, whatever he could get. He
yeah,
had to be one step ahead. Well, doing that as a reenactor, we had to do similar things. First one on the field, last one off. Somebody brings their kids in for reenacting. I said, you give this used equipment to me. You come to my tent when we're done. You understand?
yeah.
As soon as they were done in the middle of the battle, they drop it, shoot, gone. As
Mm.
soon as they were done eating, gone. Guess who gets the pleasant task? The sergeant of washing the dishes, preparing the meals, peeling the potatoes. But I had good help. I started with the 29th Ohio, Company H, Captain Bob Pugh, P-U-G-H, a Welshman. Okay. Well, anyway, digging those fire pits and being there early and helping about 12 people pitch their tent before I did my own was fun. But after a while, I thought I was at a World War II event, and I went up to the man who was the director of the COD. At that time, he was a curator, Mr. Paul Ferrace, very nice gentleman, and another gentleman by the name of Alan Winkler, another fine gentleman who's a genius. And they and all of their crew helped to restore this COD submarine that's been in Cleveland since 1959.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I said, they have all this gear over here for sale, and I could get a deal. I said, can I ask you a favor, a question? He goes, yeah. I said, do you have any reenactors on board? He goes, reenactors? I said, yeah. And I told him what we did. He said, yeah, you could do that if you want to. I said, I don't really know how to use a needle gun, and I'm not good at painting, and I don't know about submarines and all that. I don't know how to weld, but I'm willing to learn anything. But I do know how to reenact. And I think if we made the submarine and her crew come alive,
Yes.
that might be a good way that I could help out. Would you consider that? And he said, yes. So I went and I bought all this equipment and gear that I didn't need, that I did my research based on pictures, diaries, books, and I got what I needed. So I walk in, and I think this is 92 or 91, USS Cod, and I started attending meetings. And little at a time, I started the gear, and I said, I started learning about the submarine. And so I got my uniform together, and I wanted people to know, because we have real veterans on
Yeah.
board, not from the Second World War, but from the Cold War on up to Vietnam and
Yeah.
post-war. And they are members of the USS Cod veterans, uh, and some of them didn't know who reenactors were. And I said, look, I'm not trying to be, I'm not trying to get money from the government. I'm not trying to get free girls or free health care or, I'm not trying to be a pretender. I am a pretender. I'm a reenactor. What's that? And I explained to them, and they said, oh, well, some of them thought it was a good idea. Some of them said, you didn't earn that equipment. You didn't earn those badges. You don't have a right. And I listened to them. I said, well, I'm here for you. And if you don't think that's right, I won't do that. Well, the director said, go ahead. You have my blessing. Well, it was kind of a struggle at first. I didn't want to irritate the gentleman who really wore the uniforms and earned
Yes.
those dolphins, and rightfully so. I didn't have a right to pretend. But with reenacting Civil War, there's no one alive. So
Yeah.
half the guys would want to knock my block off. The other half would laugh at me and say, what an idiot.
Yeah.
They'd laugh at me. But in some of them, maybe a small percentage would say, thanks for remembering us. Well, I checked with my uncles and my father, who are World War II Navy veterans. My
Yeah.
uncle was a rear admiral in the Second World War, stationed on a battleship. And my grandmother used to say that he would bring back, they send letters home, and it was all full of Swiss cheese because he would talk. He was from Pittsburgh with a cigar in his mouth. Every every third word was GD this and GD that, and son of a whatever. But he talked like that, kind of like Patton maybe. But so he spoke his mind. They censored a lot of it, but I don't think they had any problem with that. I had uncles who fought the Germans, and one, you know, they were decorated, Purple Heart and other things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
they were very meek and mild. Their biggest accomplishment was walking their daughter down the aisle at her marriage, or being the captain or the coach of the baseball team, or going
Yeah.
fishing with their sons, or taking me out to a movie or a baseball game. That's what they wanted to do. My uncle was a hero, and he ended up working in a steel mill, graveyard shift. My uncle Carmen Lopresti, and my grandmother had Carmen and Bill. Well, anyhow, the veterans I knew, I wanted to honor them, and so I joined on with the COD, and I'd listen to their. I went to the meetings, the weekly meetings. We had one meeting a month actually, and so I started learning a little bit about the submarine, and they gave me this here pamphlet called the Submarine COD, and I learned that the COD was a mid-war Gato class submarine that was built in Groton, Connecticut, and she after going through sea trials and accepted, her base was Fremantle, Australia,
Mm.
and many ships from Great Britain, uh, Scotland, and England, and the Australian RAN were docked there, as well as Dutch submarines, all fighting the Japanese.
Yeah.
Um, so the COD was based out of Fremantle, Australia. I learned that.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the submarine COD, it has the 224 on it. That's the 224th hull designated by Congress. Okay, you could see fore and aft 40 millimeter Bofors.
Oh.
Those are 40 millimeter guns, not twin but single mounted. Originally designed for aircraft use, these were not designed for aircraft. They were designed for rigging and for shooting junks, sampans, and sea trucks. You see, the COD submarine was a different role. The COD was there to interrupt Japanese shipping that was happening in the South China Sea, that's just southeast of Vietnam, in between Australia and the Vietnam, which is the South China Sea today. So the COD would be kind of like hiding in the secret Fremantle submarine base and working in conjunction with the other submarines in the Pacific. She would hunt for, she'd pull up alongside a junk or sampan, and like a policeman, they'd say, "Well, what have you got there?" And they'd say, "Oh, nothing. You mind if we take a look? It's kind of dangerous around here with the war going on. So go ahead." So they'd look, and they wouldn't see anything bad. They'd say, "Okay, be on your way and be careful. The Japanese are not going to be as friendly." "Oh, thank you, thank you." Then some of them would come by.
Mm.
Sometimes they'd shoot at us, so we'd have to return fire. Then we'd come on board and board and say, "What have you got here?" "Oh, nothing." They'd find Japanese blankets, canteens, maybe some helmets and rice. They say,
Mm.
"What's going on here? What's this about?" "Okay, no problem. Step over here on board." They would quietly arrest the crew very politely. Then they would sink that boat with its cargo and everything right to the bottom. The next base they would stop off, they would drop off their prisoners. Okay? So thereby taking out the Japanese wanted to have junk sampans that you'd have to smuggle at the late war era. The Japanese also did, or the COD also was doing lifeguard duty, where any downed pilots that were shot down, they would, if they were in the vicinity, they would stop by and rescue them as well too. But the COD has an interesting designation.
I
Hello,
got a
Michael
question.
McNeil.
I got a
Yes.
question for you. What's that? I am Frank's reactor mates. Ask him about films the Navy did of the sub ops.
Okay. there are lots of movies. Well, I was in a movie called Topside. If you look at Topside, it was filmed on board the Cod. I portrayed Chief Petty Officer. All right. Didn't have a big of a role, but one of my former students as a substitute teacher is a professional reenactor. I don't know if you've seen the commercial where he says, bibbity bibbity, I can't remember the line. He was one of my students at West Yaga. And he said, Frank Artino, he got me involved with acting. He got me involved with reenacting. Oh my gosh. I helped a lot of people, I guess, have a passion in history because I talk a lot. You notice that? Big mouth. So on YouTube, there are videos that you could look at USS Cod, and some of them are modern, but they found some of them in the mid 90s that they didn't know exist. Because in the last year of the war, the United States Navy sent a photographer with a film camera on board every American Navy ship and said, film whatever you can for posterity.
Yeah.
So a gentleman did that. So everything I'm going to speak about tonight, you could actually watch it happen. There is no sound, but there is color film that the COD has published, as well as a TV show in the late 50s, early 60s called The Silent Service. And they tell the story of many American submarines, including the USS Cod. And so I would encourage you to watch that on YouTube. They're excellent, and they'll really make you start thinking about what it would be like to be a submariner in the Second World War.
Can I ask you a question about the submarine? I've got a friend here. His name's Oliver, and he wants to ask you a couple of questions. Is that all right?
Yes, of course. That's why I'm here.
Right. How long could they run for underwater?
Okay.
That's the first one.
The USS Cod is a mid-war diesel-class submarine. The way they were designed back then is they had General Motors Cleveland-built engines at the GM Diesel Works. General Motors made 80% of the U.S. Navy's diesel engines in the Second World War. Fairbanks Morse made the other 20%. Okay, so the Cod had Cleveland-built diesel engines in them. These diesel engines would run at night on the surface. You cannot run your automobile underwater, can you? Why? It needs oxygen. Don't you need oxygen to breathe? So does your car. If you tried to run that submarine under the water, the whole submarine would fill up with diesel fume and you would die. So they had to all vent all ports and operate at night on the surface. While they were operating the diesel engines do not run the submarine. The submarine is a diesel electric boat. The submarine engines would charge the Sargo lead acid batteries that are inside the submarine. So all night long, the engines would run and get very hot in that engine room. These guys would be dressed in their skivvies, a t-shirt, underwear, bathing suit, and wear sandals. That was the normal uniform of the COD members during this on a submarine. No fancy like Topside, no Bristol fashion and ship shape. No, sir, not on board an American submarine. So anyway, when daybreak came, they would turn the engines off, vent the diesel fumes, and then it would take them with about 50 or 60 seconds to submerge. They would blow the ballast tanks, and they would go ahead and then rig the dive planes out, and then at an angle, and the submarine would submerge, possibly to periscope depth. At that point, they'd have to close. They have something called a Christmas tree, and a Christmas tree has red and blue lights. Those red and blue lights tell what valves are open and closed, what hatches are open. All of them have to be closed. If they're open, they're red. If you have a red light, that means stop. Whoa, you're not going to go down because you're going to be flooded. So once they get the okay, they'll say dive twice. They'll blow the dive thing, not 3 times like they do on the movies. Dive, and they would dive. And if they operated under low power, they could go 48 hours submerged. If they operated I'm sorry, yeah, low power 48. If they operated higher power a little bit faster, only 24 hours submerged. By then, the batteries would be close to being spent,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have to submerge or surface at night again to recharge those batteries. So up and down and up and down. They didn't stay submerged like modern submarines can today. Back
No.
then, they had to go up and down.
Yeah.
So, if that answers your question,
I've got one more. I've actually got
yes.
two more questions from him. He would like to know, right? This is actually quite an interesting one. What was it? What was the food like, and was some of it fresh or tinned? That's a good one.
What
Food.
did it look like? What was that?
No, no. What was the food like on the submarine?
The
Was it
food. Oh,
tinned or fresh? If you know what
it
I'm
was
saying.
best known that the food was the finest in the Navy. Actually, the finest food around. Submarines, they lost quite a few submarines in the Second World War. It was very dangerous, very hazardous. You had to have psychological training,
Yeah.
and they'd have to screen you. If somebody bumped into you, you wouldn't say, "Hey, buddy, put up your dukes. What do you think you're?" No, you say, "Excuse me, after you," because you have 66 sailors on board, along with 8 or 9, maybe 10 officers. At the beginning of the war, they had their own assigned bunks. They had enough for everybody. When they took on more passengers, they had to hot bunk it. That would mean after you slept your certain amount of time, you'd get off and do your duty in your skivvies. While your bed was still warm, some other fellow would jump in and he'd sleep, go to sleep.
Yeah.
As soon as he'd get up again, somebody else would come in or you'd come back again. Maybe 3, 4 people would share it,
Wow.
depending on how many they needed. Okay, so the food was a special treat. They had steaks. They had anything good you could think of because um, it was monotonous. There was no exercising. There was no moving around. You were cramped. You barely had room. Basically, wherever you're sitting right now, if you've been on a school bus before,
No.
okay, imagine staying on a school bus for 3 months with
Yeah.
everybody on that and just walking down the middle saying, "Excuse me, pardon me," smelling the diesel smell, but being submerged and you can't open the windows. Okay, so the submarine had its shortcomings as well too. So one of the treats they did was having excellent food. George J. Sacco was the cook on board the USS Cod submarine, and I did find a letter of his written to his sister stating the fact that he's getting pudgy and overweight because of the great food, but the lack of exercise because he'd come from a farm
Yeah.
and they didn't have the exercise facilities like maybe if you were in the infantry or any other place on land, even on a stone frigate or on a British ship, they had some type of calisthenics. They really didn't have that. Every now and then, maybe if they could have lookouts, they might get a chance to jump in the ocean for a while and swim around a little bit, but that's about it.
It's amazing. It truly is. I mean, if you to think about the new submarines today, how different these submarines are. I mean, they can stay down for what? How long can a
Yes.
nuclear submarine stay down for? What is it you said? Is it a year or longer? It's just the food. I don't know how long they can keep a nuclear submarine down for, but can you
Well,
imagine being?
if
It's
it was all volunteer, so boy, that Drew and boy, that Chris, he's getting on my nerves, you know. And if somebody, okay, well, you guys can handle it later on. But guess what? Next time we're in port, good luck to you. You can get off anytime you want. They're not going to
here's a
keep
quick.
you on board. It's all
Here's a.
volunteer. So if you decide you're done, over you
Uh,
can go and they'll replace you just like that with no anger, no chastisement or anything. It's all volunteer.
there is Oliver. There, it was asking the questions. 25 to 30 years. Can you
What's that?
imagine spend under the sea? It's seemingly that's what the nuclear ones can do.
Oh yeah, the nuclear
Twenty.
ones. Yeah, 25 to 30 years. Modern nuclear submarines, from what I'm told by some folks, they have nuclear energy about the size of your fist, and that will supply for 25 to 30 years. They could stay submerged. They make their own oxygen. They have enough armament and never run out of fuel. There's only one little problem, one wee problem.
Food.
You've got to eat. And
Yeah.
eventually, if they could figure out how to make the food last that long or to grow their own, or actually have ships that are drones that don't have any
Yeah.
humans on board at all. But since they have humans on board, they have to surface sometime to take on supplies in terms of food. They can wash their clothes. They're pretty much self-contained. From what I understand, they could go on one side of the UK and on the other side of the UK and plug themselves in. And in case of an emergency, they could power up indefinitely any country they want
That's
to,
that's
running
truly
on,
amazing.
on nuclear power, unlimited power, the whole country.
That's that is truly amazing
Yeah,
how things have got that way. I mean, I don't know. See, as I was talking to my friend the other day about this, I mean, you're at war, right? You're on a battleship or you're on a destroyer. A torpedo hits, you can jump off, right? Hopefully, you can swim away, right?
I had
You're
the
on a
pleasure to
submarine,
be on. Mhm.
and
I had the
it's
pleasure to be on board an American submarine a few years back in Norfolk, Virginia, and also a Dutch submarine that was in
yeah,
for repairs in Norfolk, Virginia. So, because something interesting happened with the COD, every submarine is different, but
yes,
the USS COD has a distinction of the only sub to sub international rescue in
right,
history. In late 1945, the Dutch submarine, she was a mine layer, a minenlegger, called the
yeah,
O-19, Onderzeedienst 19, was operating um, on the surface at full power. Now, the maps that they got, if you know about Holland and how Hitler took over Holland,
yes, yeah,
they barely got these submariners out of there at the last minute.
yeah,
They made it for Scotland, and the engines were rebuilt and refitted in Scotland. So thank you, Scotland, for taking care of those Dutch submariners. Well, the Dutch submarines went there, and then after that, they were back in business again. Well, some of their maps were not updated; they were kind of old, and they couldn't get any more. So they did the best they could.
yeah.
Well, they were in the South China Sea by Lad Reef, and they were operating on the surface, and all of a sudden, boom! One guy got his shoulder knocked out of thing. The submarine went and it was going boom, 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 boom every time the propeller turned. What happened
Mm.
is she hit a coral reef that was just underneath the surface and rammed that submarine right up on top of that coral reef. Her bow was sticking right up just like that. And so all these guys are
Wow.
knocked all over the place. Everything. What the heck happened here? So they had no indication that there was coral right there. They thought it was open sea. They didn't have the. It wasn't their fault. It was the maps that
Their
betrayed
maps
them.
were old. Hmm.
So they couldn't get off that reef because her mine laying doors were open and some of them were jammed and fused into that coral rock on Lad
Yeah,
Reef. So they broke radio silence briefly and said what happened. Well, the COD picked up on it through their radio.
mm.
They were in the vicinity. They said, "We'll be there." So the COD and her crew made way, and when they came across the Dutch submarine, there she was, lo and behold, like a fish out of water, literally. And
Yeah,
so they pulled up alongside, and they signaled and all that, and everything I'm telling you is on film. So when you get on YouTube, take a look at it. USS
I
COD,
will. I will
Dutch
tonight.
Rescue 019. You'll be amazed. But so the COD a photographer had a 16 millimeter. We have that camera. The director has that very camera, 16 millimeter silent film of color film, and so they tried for a couple of days to get that submarine loose. They put chains on her. They backed up. They did everything they could.
Yeah,
And at one point, the skipper of the COD said to the skipper of the Dutch submarine, we're going to try one last thing. We've been trying for a couple of days. The Japanese could come by any minute, and we'll both be
yeah,
sitting ducks. So we got to do something. We got to do it fast now. We've wasted enough time. We both got to be on our way. And I don't want to have to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and you know what that's going to be. but let's try one more time. So they put a big chain around her, and they said to the Dutch captain, they said, we might pull the conning tower off. You might have two halves of your submarine. And he said, well, I'd rather have half a submarine than no submarine, so go ahead and try it. So they did, and it didn't work. So everybody became sad, and they became solemn. They knew what that meant. So they took all, I think it was 55 crewmen on board, Dutch submariners, and they took every submariner and they came on board the Cod,
Yeah.
which was already cramped anyway. And these submariners came on board the Cod, and then they sent a couple of torpedoes into her. They sent her 5-inch, 25-inch deck gun. Uh, um, you'll see that too, them shelling the poor Dutch submarine and hitting it with 40 millimeter. And you could see pieces of the submarine blowing sky high. You could see the pieces flying and everything. And at that point, they transferred the Dutch flag over to the USS Cod. And the captain said, put them together.
Mm-hmm.
The Dutch and American flags are going to fly on this submarine together. When the Dutch saw that, they said, from this time on, the USS Cod is forever an honorary Dutch submarine. We will never forget this. You are all now part of our country, too.
Mm.
And so they made way for Subic Bay, Philippines, because the Cod was dropping off, I believe, a sick crewman, because the Cod did not have doctors on board. They were too valuable in case the submarines would be lost.
Yeah.
So they had a pharmacist mate, and some of them were of various degrees. I think they would do operations sometimes in the captain's wardroom on a table, whatever they had to do. And they do the best they could, appendicitis or patching up, sewing up things until they got to the base with a real doctor. So they made way for Subic Bay, where they dropped off the Dutch submariners. On board, they served them fried chicken, good old American fried chicken, and it was standing room only. They also had a secret weapon on board the USS Cod. I guess I could tell you this now, because there's nobody listening, I hope. I hope there's no one listening. The secret weapon is a little bit closer. Ice cream. We had an ice cream machine on board right in the crew's quarters. What do you think of that? How do you like an ice cream machine in your bedroom? Anytime
That'd
you
be
want.
great.
When you've got problems, doesn't ice cream solve it? So you
Mm-hmm.
go over and make some self-serve ice cream as much as you could hold. Well, when those Dutch submariners saw that,
Oh my God.
one of the young fellows, they were drinking beer, and he said, "Can I have something to drink?" They said, "No, you're too young." So he came back. He said, "Well, you're too old to be eating ice cream." So anyhow, they dropped him off at Subic Bay. Shortly thereafter, they got information. What's that? Okay, I'm reading that, Mike. So shortly thereafter, they had information about the war ended. Well, they didn't know that back then. They didn't know. So the Dutch submarine said, "Cod, we want you to come back to Subic Bay. We have something important for you." So the Cod said, "What is it? We'll tell you when we get here." So the Cod turned around and went back there. What happened? What's someone sick? Surprise! We're going to give you a party, and therefore, if you see the Cod submarine, there's a martini glass on the side of the Cod.
Oh.
That martini glass symbolizes the remembrance of the party that the Dutch submariners gave for the Cod. While that party went on, then word broke out that the war was over. And from what I understand,
Yeah.
it took about 5 or 10 years for some of those submariners to get their sea legs back again after that party.
Yes. I bet. Especially with the Americans.
So the Cod sank 26 junks and sampans and sea trunks,
Wow.
sunk the Japanese destroyer Karukaya, along with junk, sampans, and sea trucks, and also, I think, 36 or 38,000 tons of enemy shipping sent to the bottom. The Cod was on 7 war patrols, and every war patrol was considered successful.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the Cod was depth charged a couple of times, and you could still see buckling in her hull from that. It
Wow.
would break glasses. It would shatter things, and
What
also
was the,
if you were too close to the side, you could actually rupture the veins in your head, and you can get a stroke from that if you're
wow.
too close
What was
to
the
the depth
what
charge
was
itself.
what was the thickness of the hull? How thick was it?
I think only about a half inch of steel, a half inch, some a
That's
quarter or a half inch of high tensile steel. Not much, but the reason being is like if you have an egg that's perfectly round, as long as it's intact, you
yeah.
can't crush that egg, right?
That's right.
Because the way it's designed. So the cod was designed as thin as the hull was. She also had corking on the inside of the hull to deaden the sound, so you
Yep.
couldn't hear the sound.
I've heard
Well,
about that. I've heard about that.
so the cod's crew was responsible for the only international sub-to-sub rescue in history. You could also see that going on. And I was fortunate enough to participate in a reenactment of the rescue of the O-19. One time I played the Dutch captain. One time I played a crew member. And I brought a few crew members on board who had various talents, more than I do, and are now still serving on board the submarine cod in restoration. The cod is supposed to go to dry dock in the spring, where they could do some dry docking repairs to her hull below the waterline. Even though she's
Yeah.
in fresh water, the fresh water they weld in sacrificial zinc bars
Yes.
to rot away before the hull does itself. Well, the Navy purposely, when they brought the cod to Cleveland in 1959 to replace the USS Gar, which was a training ship. Um,
There's a question for you. Ask him about putting a broom on the main
ah,
periscope. Coming back
yes,
to
a
port.
new broom sweeps clean. Right. They put a broom on the main periscope. Um, that's right. Um, I was a reenactor on board a landing craft at D-Day Conneaut, where we reenact the D-Day invasion. And I had the honor of serving as one of the crew members on board a landing craft, a diesel landing craft.
Aye.
And I told our skipper about that I was a COD crew member, and actually I was the first COD reenactor there at D-Day Conneaut, selling the COD and making them aware that our submarine exists in Cleveland. Please come visit us and support us because this is history. Well, he put up a broom, and that broom symbolizes that a new broom sweeps clean. So
Sweeps clean.
yeah, so
I
that
mean, if,
he he wanted to honor the past COD crew and the current volunteers. This is all volunteer. There are some paid members on board, but many are volunteers who
yeah.
do this out of the love of their own heart, the kindness of their own heart. And the director, Paul Ferrace, is a very kind and benevolent gentleman who rewards us with pizza and other perks. He's a very kind and
It,
generous and giving person, and he
it's
takes
good.
care of his crew.
It's good that there is people like you and him and other people because if it wasn't, that would just turned into razor blades, as you say. And
There are some
the,
submarines right now that are rotting because the cities don't
yes,
have. We have no. The military is not mean. They're practical, and they said we're gonna. Your cod is in your care now. However, it's the only. If you let her go into disrepair, we're going to take her up and scrap her, and that'll be it.
that's
Well, the cod is considered, by some as the finest World War II restoration of a mid-war Gato class ship. There are other now submarines, the Torsk and the Drum, and there's many museum ships out there right now that they have wonderful crews, wonderful staff, and they're doing a wonderful, wonderful job uh, in keeping their submarines going.
see. If I've always wondered this. Right, again, this has got to sound like a stupid question, right? But see in the submarines when they say say they were going to sink a ship or they were under attack, they turned on a red light. Why? Because if they were under the sea anyway, could they not just keep the normal light on? Because they wouldn't see it, would they?
Yeah. Sometimes the cod would have to crash dive, and that means an enemy plane is approaching or a ship or something. And so even though they're on the surface, it's at night. They have to shut those. those hatches quickly, and the engine room will heat up very quickly. So everyone is pouring sweat. So they used to call these submarines pig boats, because imagine the smell of diesel fuel. Imagine the smell of tobacco smoke. Imagine the smell of latrine, urine. Imagine the smell of body odor and sweat. And imagine the smell of food cooking, all mixed together at the same time.
Good God.
They said after a while, you didn't notice it.
How many was the
And
crew? How many?
there were a couple of guys on leave. And the one guy said, "Hey, what's that? What's that funny smell? Do you smell it?" And he goes, "Knock it off, Smitty." He goes, "What do you mean?" "That's fresh air." He forgot the smell of fresh air. He was so used to smelling. I guess the body adapts to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Any
how
more
many
questions?
crew? How many
Huh?
crew was there? How many crew was there?
Anywhere between 66. It could go
Wow,
up to more,
that's actually
depending on the mission and the length of the mission. It would vary.
that's
Um,
actually quite a lot considering the size. Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's no that big,
yeah.
which is
No,
quite.
it would vary. It would vary. It varies, depending on the mission and the length of duration. They could go out for a month, or they could go out for 3 or 4 months or five
There's
months.
a there's your friend there. What is it? One Yank
That's right.
sub
The USS
US.
Barb sank a train.
Did that? How
Yes,
did manage that?
some submarines sank. Some submarines sank other submarines, Japanese submarines. One sank a train. One sank an outhouse. See, up until 1943, the gyroscopes and the detonators were not perfected on
Yeah,
the Type 14 torpedo. Type the COD's main armament was 24 torpedoes. She had 10 tubes forward and 4 tubes aft. Those tubes, those torpedoes were not armed until they were fired. They had what they call a TDC. The COD has, as far as I know, the only functioning torpedo data computer in existence. That TDC was taken out years ago, cleaned, repaired, recalibrated. What was the cruise quarters like? Comfortable or no? Well, it depends. The only one who had their private bunk was the captain. He had a telephone in there. He had his desk. He had a sink. He also had a depth gauge, and and a compass, so he could look at a glance what their bearings were, where they were, and the captain's quarters. Then the next after that, you had what they call the goat locker, the chief petty officers. I believe there were between 4 or 5 of them in their own little cubicle, not very, only as big as a human being could lay out, and room to walk for one person in between. Then you had the cruise quarters, and I believe they held 35 bunks, 35, 36 bunks there. And those bunks, I think, were 3 or 4 from the bottom up, and I can't remember. They had no formal sick bay, but in the corner by, I believe it was the port side of the submarine, uh, port uh, port aft of the cruise quarters, they had a stainless steel locker with medical supplies in there. And those bunks that are adjoining that locker is where sick folk would go and they'd stay there. If they wanted to rig privacy up, they'd maybe rig a blanket or a towel that looks just like this. Here we go.
let's see the chat. There we go.
Here's the original prop that I bought.
USN.
United States Navy. Okay. And these things would be hanging just like this from your bunk. You had a little pouch as well, and you keep shaving equipment. Maybe a little, you wouldn't have aftershave, it wouldn't matter. You'd have shaving gear, pictures of your girlfriends. They had plenty of girl pictures up there, but I
Mm-hmm.
shouldn't talk about that. But Rita Hayworth and Betty Gable and, gals like that, um, uh, that kept up the morale, as well as the good food. And you'd have these hanging there, washcloths, maybe a couple of shirts. They also had their uniforms underneath their mattresses. So as they laid there, the uniforms would be constantly pressed. So when they got
Ah,
in, they might take a shower right when they were coming in. The guys who had shore leave would make sure they would put on their dress, whites, or wintertime dress blues, and they'd go out and they'd shave and clean up. The ones who stayed on board, they didn't care. They, just like you're living at home, dressed like COVID-19, underwear, t-shirt, who's going to see you? Nobody's coming in. You know, you got a job to do.
there
Um,
was a
they,
recent today in the mystery fishing
they,
disasters, I've heard.
yeah, very, very often
Yeah,
submarines would make a wake
yeah,
and they could probably disrupt ships. They didn't know if it was a porpoise or a whale or a submarine because submarines, what do they call them? The silent service.
yes.
Now I will tell you, during the Second World War, the American submarines and total all the Allied submarines, I believe, sank 80% of enemy shipping. But they didn't broadcast that. The wolf packs, they were dangerous in the First World War, the German wolf packs. They're also dangerous at the beginning of the Second World War. Then we cracked the code. We knew where they were, thanks to the British giving us their information.
That's quite an interesting. They only have this also mentioned that the nuclear sub sank in enemy warship Royal Navy 1982. Yep,
Yes,
that's right.
very good. hmm My friend
Yeah,
Michael McNeil is a wealth of information on UK Navy. Um, I know a little bit about World War II. Mike knows a lot about things like that. So I rely as a
there's
Mike is.
something that we were
I saw the
talking about
Americans
the
had
other
submarine
day.
during the Civil War. Ah, here we go.
You were
Yes,
talking about this, weren't we?
during the American Civil War, which I'm a reenactor, we all know about the C.L. Hunley. The Hunley was a Confederate States submarine. Uh, she had a successful mission. And then they think because of the wave action, there was only one way in and one way out. And the submarine was powered by manpower. You sat on a little bench and you cranked along with other men and you cranked the propeller. And that's how but she had a spar on front with,
Mm,
with dynamite. And the idea was to go into a ship, lodge that big hook
yeah,
into her, then back off. Then they had a string. And when they were far enough distance, pull the string
cool.
and explode a hole in the ship, which they did. And they sent her to the bottom. Um, but I believe it was a Kearsarge. But
Mm,
she went to the no, that was another one. But she went to the bottom. But then she capsized, and all of her crew died. That
oh,
was a Confederate C.L. Hunley. They raised the Hunley, and they took the remains of the Hunley crew out. They identified them. They contacted their family members, and they had a formal funeral for them.
yeah,
Now the Hunley is on display and under restoration. But there's another submarine,
that's right.
a, a Union submarine that not many people know about called the Alligator. Google the Alligator submarine. She sank in 1862.
Wow.
No loss of life. She was being towed, and during a bad storm, she was ready to rock and wreck the boat that she was being towed behind. So they cut her loose. Well, they could not find her ever again. I believe the Navy is still looking for that submarine. But she supposedly was even more advanced than the Hunley. And they have some of the blueprints and some of the details, but they'd sure like to get a hold of her, but they cannot find her. She may have been subducted
Yeah,
in the deepest part of the ocean, got taken under, and melted up again in the bowels of the earth and lost
there we
forever. We
go.
don't really know.
There's the alligator
Yes,
there.
there's the alligator. Yes, she was a little bit. Yes, there you go. That's what the alligator looked like. So I don't know how stable she was. I don't know a whole lot about it, but the Navy's still looking for her. She still might be down there. She might not be down there.
She might be buried in silt. Probably just went, and
Yeah,
it's been
but
buried.
they're looking for her. But we did find, believe it or not, we've got the Hunley though, and that's a rare thing to have. So they're restoring the Hunley to quote unquote operational condition, but she'd never be taken out because it was a death trap. It was too unstable, too dangerous, and there's no provisions for emergency in and out. Every crew that served on board the Hunley perished. Every
Here's a
crew.
question. Here's a question talking about death and that, some of the chat will probably want me to ask you. What spiritual experiences have you had? I bet you've had quite a few.
Okay, you're talking about in general,
In
or
general, in reenactments and the
okay,
submarine or whatever.
not to cause fights, but my father is Protestant. My mother's Roman Catholic. So
Mm,
we believe in God. Okay,
mm,
like many of you do. Some of you probably do not. Well, um, I don't really didn't believe in. I was intrigued with ghost stories as a boy, as probably many people are, and I read a lot of ghost stories.
mm,
But um, you don't have any proof. I remember thinking that there was somebody standing by the door of my room and looking at me, and Mom, there's nobody there. I swore there was. Oh, there's nobody there. But sometimes I think I see stuff. There's nobody there. Well, as a child, you're intrigued with that, and I used to read a lot of those books. Well, when I became a Civil War reenactor, I met some people who told me some tall tales, some ghost stories, and I thought, there's an old saying: believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. So I was respectful to them, and I said, "Oh, you don't say, really now?" And I thought, whatever. But I was respectful to them. I don't. I said, "Well, that no, okay." But I walked away thinking maybe they believe it, or maybe they don't. I don't know. But I thought if there's anything to this, I think I'll be on plenty of battlefields. I'll be right where they died, right where they fought.
yeah.
And if there's anything to this, I'll have to see it for myself. Well, I did. I'm not here tonight to convince any of you that there exists existence of a paranormal. Um, but from what I understand, energy cannot be created and
Yeah.
it cannot be destroyed. It exists continuously.
Mm-hmm.
When a biological entity dies, the energy that is in that gets converted almost like if you burn a log. The energy that's stored up of the sun comes into carbon
The heat.
dioxide, water, and the flame and is consumed and goes off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you bury something, a tree dies. That energy is converted back into the soil and it is absorbed for other plants to use. So the energy is recycled. So they say the same with living biological creatures that breathe air, like we do. So okay, it's a good thing. Well, I uh, I started reenacting, and at first I didn't really see anything. I heard all these stories, and I know how your mind can play tricks on you, and you really think you see things that aren't there. And I started seeing things little at a time, and I saw them after a while, kind of frequently, but not so. And I would laugh and say, "There I go again.
Yeah.
It's not really there. It's all up here." And the funny thing is, I would experience these things, and other people were right next to me, and they heard and saw the same thing I did.
Mm-hmm.
When my cat died at home, I was walking up the stairs. His name was Smokey. About 3 days after I buried him in the backyard, I looked down and my mother's standing next to me. My cat looked up at me from the stairway, 3 feet away from me, went meow. And I said, Smokey. And I reached down to pet him, and he disappeared, and I could see through him. And my mom went,
Mm.
I said, Mom, did you see that? She goes, that's your imagination. I said to her, how could you and me both see my imagination? She didn't have any explanation for that. Okay. Then I would go to Gettysburg. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on a ghost tour. They're fun and they're entertaining. And, take it everything with a grain of salt. I'm not here to convince anyone, but this is a paranormal show, so I'm going to tell you.
Yeah.
And I'd ask the lady, did these people own cats? Why do you ask? I just wondered. I didn't tell her that I saw cats walking around the baseboard of the home, and I could see through them.
Yeah.
The hotel I stayed at in Gettysburg, called the Fairfield Lodge on 116, is where Robert E. Lee retreated after the battle, and the Army of Northern Virginia had a 25-mile-long train of soldiers going back to Virginia. Many have wounded, sick, and dying. They buried them along the way in shallow graves. Well, here we are years ago at one of my first reenactments at Remembrance Day in November. And I was sharing my room with a young fellow who I knew he'd take forever in the bathroom. So I got up early and purposely took a shower and put my uniform on and got ready for the exciting day ahead. Then I wanted to cool off. I was hot. So I went outside in my hot, heavy wool uniform, and it was cool fall, late November in Pennsylvania. And I walked around. I saw apple trees in the backyard. My grandfather, I grew up with apple trees in an orchard. We had 300. And I was enjoying the scenery when all of a sudden it started to rain. I heard it raining heavy. I said, I better get in. Then I noticed, why am I getting wet? And I looked and I felt the leaves on the trees, and they're bone dry. Then as I started walking back toward the room, the sound went less and less. So I went back to where I started, and it got more again. So I stood there in that spot, and it was raining cats and dogs with no water. Then I went back to the room, and the sound went away. I said, this is crazy. So I went back to the room, and I asked the ordnance sergeant, sue me. I said, Bill, come over a minute, will you? What is it, quartermaster sergeant? I said, just come on, I got to show you something. So he said, okay. So he followed me, and I took him to the spot, and I said, what do you hear? Gee, it's raining. I said, are we getting wet? He said, no. I said, how come it's raining? Gee, I don't know. So that's nothing that you would be frightened about, but it's perplexing. Later on, I found and discovered that after the battle, it rained and rained and rained and made the retreat that much more dreary. So we were hearing the rain. I also noticed when we came back sometimes from an event, back to the room, the water was running full blast in the sink. I said, who did that? Probably the cleaning lady left it on. Well, the lady who owned it is the one who cleaned it. And when I asked her about it, she said, no, I wouldn't do that. It happened a couple of times. Okay. I was at the Cashtown Inn, and I took pictures of us all smiling on a Friday before we went out onto town to have a nice dinner at one of the beautiful restaurants in Gettysburg. When I got the picture back, all these little white little dots of different colors all above us on the porch. Orbs. That's what they call them now. I said, what's this? I said, I don't know. Maybe something on the lens. Then I went to Devil's Den with my old Nikon FA. And when I went to take a picture, I brought it to my eye, and I saw like a hand, like I could see through it. And I went like that. There's nobody there. And I pulled up again, and there's a hand right in front of the camera. I put it down again. There's no one there. So the third time I went up, and I tried to advance it. Now, my camera worked perfectly, but it advanced all of the 36 pictures. I had a film camera, and I never know a camera to do that. I brought it back to the room, and I took out the film, and I loaded it again, and it worked fine the rest of the weekend. But when I was down there on the battlefield, the camera wouldn't work, and I remember that thing. So I kept this to myself. I'm not here to tell anybody, it's like, that's kind of weird. And so in between, I went on a vacation. I mentioned I was a scuba diver, and I went to Sydney, Australia, by way of Fiji Island. And we went to Cairns, Australia, and went on board a ship called the Pacific Princess, which in the Second World War was with the Royal Australian Navy um, submarine chaser, a small boat, wooden held boat. And they would drop depth charges and look for Japanese submarines that were trying to infiltrate off the coast of Queensland, New South Wales. And while I was laying in my bunk one night, again, my imagination going, I heard, help me, help me, help me, mate, mate, help me. And I'm thinking, these Aussies, they're making fun of us. They're going to have some fun with us Yanks, aren't they? Okay, I'll play along. So I'm laying in my bunk and I'm laying there. The ship's rocking back and forth, and I'm being lulled into sleep, And I'm laying in a bunk that I found out later a sailor died right in the bunk that I was sleeping in. So I didn't say anything. The next night I heard, help me, Frank. Now it's calling my name.
Mm.
Now they know my name. It's the second night, no problem. They didn't know my name. It was just mate. Now it's Frank. The third night I heard it again, and I sat up in bed. They said, okay, who's there? I'm like Ebenezer Scrooge. Us. It's a bit of undigested cheese. You're more of, and I'm like that. And I opened the door and I walked out my room and I walked along and I saw everyone's asleep. I didn't understand it, but I wasn't frightened. The next morning at breakfast, the fourth day, I asked one of the dive masters, I said, something funny happened. And the crew looks over at me and I said, did you ever hear anything funny at night or whatever? Funny sounds? She said, what do you mean? I said, this is stupid. But I thought I heard somebody say, help me, mate, help me, Yank. And the captain took out a picture of the ship, the boat during the Second World War, with her full armament, which she looked like, and explained the history of the World War II history of that submarine, which I didn't know. He said, someone died in your very bunk. And then when Joel heard about that, Joel Stoffa, he said, I heard the same thing. Somebody was asking me to help him. I thought it was somebody playing tricks. I said, it still might be, Joel. We'll play along. Well, I remember what I heard or what I read as a boy about passing on. So the fifth night I heard it again. So I sat up and I said, listen, mate, my name's Frank. I'm a Yank from Ohio in the United States. I said, I want you to know the job is well done. We won. We won. But I have to take the bad news to you. I think you've passed on. Take a look around.
Mhm.
I want you to know that I'm very sorry, but they said that you may have died in your sleep of a very bad tropical disease. Can I ask if this is all for real, a spirit guide to open up a light from heaven to show you the stairway to get back home? I would think that your mother and father and your family would like to finally see you. Well, I said those words, and the rest of we were on that board for over a week before we disembarked and had a wonderful tour of Sydney after that. And before that, Cairns, and then went to Sydney and stayed at the New Crest Hotel in King's Cross in Sydney.
Mhm.
And but I didn't hear anything after that. So I kind of like to think that maybe I helped someone. Then I started,
That's.
yeah. Then I started reenacting, and I had
Can I
the
just
strangest,
can I
yeah.
can I just say I was going to have a 1 minute break. I need to go and get a bottle of water. If you want to go and get
Okay.
yourself a drink,
Oh, could I get myself one?
yeah, when you go,
I'm going to have a
go
brew
go
up, a
get one.
cup of tea. Okay. And I might come back dressed in a little bit different than you see me now. I'll be back in 60 seconds. Thank you.
Hey guys, just waiting in Frank making his cup of tea. How's the chat tonight, guys? How are you all tonight? I've been trying to read your comments, but just been really busy. Hey, paranormal world. Let's see. What's that, Frank? We were sleeping in a good shop just before to go to the road. Yep. Are you enjoying the show tonight, guys? Say in the chat. What's that? Oh, he's sharing it. The other day I'm watching you over the night. There was a lot of bangs, movement, things outside. Yes, guys, that's the spirits. Hope you've all had a lovely weekend. Let me have a look here. I'm just going to check something here. Had to have a wee rest, guys. Had to go and get a bottle of water. I went and got a fresh can of the old Bars Shandy. If you're still watching, Oliver, I hope you enjoyed it. Michael. Yes, being a lot going. There you go, guys. Right. How many's in the chat tonight, guys? It says 14 on my StreamYard. Let's see. 14. So you're loving it, Drew, are you? Good. Everybody, give me a thumbs up. Any new subscribers too. Oh, look at this! Look at this! You're getting the uniform now, guys.
Okay, I'm dressed in the uniform of Lieutenant Commander, probably would dress on the USS Cod submarine. He's got this is called a deck jacket from 1943, and this is an officer's hat that anyone from a lieutenant to a captain, well, captain would have, but this is Lieutenant Commander, and this is one of my personas on the USS Cod. Okay, this is what you pretty much wear on the deck right now. It's a little bit cold right now in November,
Yeah.
so if we were in the North Atlantic, we would be dressed like this. Here I have my coffee mug, and you can see here is a symbol. This is the USS Cod. It shows the submarine Dolphins that was adopted in 1923. She has 7 battle stars on top of that. You can see various Japanese flags. The ones with the rays are Imperial Japanese warships. The ones without the rays are just the regular Japanese national flag, which is called the Hinomaru. Hinomaru means the sun's red disk. They believed Emperor Hirohito was actually the embodiment of a god, the sun god. So
I've heard that.
that's why they would do anything he said, because you were talking literally to a god.
Yeah.
So this is my one of my reenactment uniforms. I'll change different uniforms, getting into the spirit. So let me salute all of you for being here tonight.
There you go.
Permission to come aboard. Permission granted. Hello, I'm Lieutenant Commander Franklin Kimball. I'm the skipper on board the USS Cod. Here we are in our wardroom here. This is where we take our meals. We'll sit here and relax with the other officers and plan things. We have a radio over here. We have a record player. We have all our nautical charts. And the orderly serves us over here. We also listen to, thank you. We also listen to this gal. They call her Tokyo Rose. Huh, isn't that a joke? She seems to know who we are. I have no idea how she understands that. They think she's a Japanese gal who went to Japan during the war, Japanese American, and then she got stuck there during the war. Well, she has to do what they tell her, but so anyhow, here we are in the wardroom. Welcome to our wardroom, and this is my official COD mud. On the other side, you can see
That's cool.
the COD's logo, the USS COD. That is an enemy skull with a Mark 14 torpedo going through there.
Here's
Okay.
somebody got a question for you. Have
Yes,
uniforms?
yes. They say, and I actually have books on this subject too, because I've been experienced some paranormal. Cheers.
Hmm.
Mm.
Bars, lemonade, shandy, non-alcoholic. So if you go.
For medicinal purposes only.
Oh yeah.
But I am also, those of you in the United Kingdom, I'm starting off as a Yank here, but I will also surprise you that I am in my neighborhood one of the first reenactors of British, thanks to my friend Michael McNeil, who has been a Anglophile, I think, his entire life. I'm sure in a past life he was someone you might recognize, but he's a very good friend of mine, and because of him, I expanded. I will give Michael McNeil a lot of credit for my continuance with this hobby. All also like suboptimal Atlantic training conducted by the Royal Navy, those Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean by the USN. Very good. I would not know that, but Michael McNeil would. But I might look the part. I play one on
Oh, you
TV and in
do.
movies, but he's
You
got it up
do.
here, Michael.
I mean,
So
that
yes,
uniform's amazing.
um, yes, it brings you back, doesn't it? So
It
imagine
does.
me on the submarine when someone from the public comes by and they say people going like this, and they're like, and we're all business, and we try to talk the way they did as well,
Yeah.
and so some people would come and they'd start to cry, and I say, what's wrong? They say, you remind me of my father and my grandfather, and I said,
Yeah.
don't forget them. Then I'm doing my job. Don't forget them. They're us. We're their kids.
Oh yeah.
They care about
Mhm.
us.
If it
So
wasn't for
don't
some of
forget
them,
them.
if it wasn't
They
for
weren't
them,
gods.
we'd
They weren't
probably be
miracle
speaking
men.
German or Japanese.
I honor all people. The Japanese did their part.
Mhm. Yeah.
What happened there? Did you see that? Oh, okay. But anyhow, so this is what they would wear. Uh, Sometimes when it would get cold at night in the South Pacific as well too. But they
Hmm.
had other things to wear, and I might switch into that too. But I might drop rank and suddenly be a regular enlisted seaman on board the cod. Or if they wanted to get more casual, they'd look like this.
So you guys, you're enjoying the show tonight. I hope you are. Um, the Chris and Alan show will be back on as soon as the lockdown's over. That's for you guys that want it back.
Or you might see a hat like this, just a regular baseball cap on a submarine.
Yeah.
And you notice it's got the
The
officer's
insignia.
insignia on there. Okay. And they might wear a work jacket. This work jacket was very common. They'd have a t-shirt underneath it. And they call these a denim work jacket. And
I've seen that in the old war films where they were wearing like the denim jackets.
yes, this is actually, these were issued. If you find the originals online today, they go for an ungodly amount of money. But you've seen fellas dressed
Uh,
like this, right? Okay. This is very common. Most crew members on board the Cod would have either a baseball cap like that with no insignia, or this, or maybe a submariner, or nothing. But this baseball cap's just made out of regular cotton, and so is this with a T-shirt underneath. And so it doesn't look very fancy, does it? I look like a street sweeper, don't you? But I'm here to do a job, and I'm not here to have a fashion statement, ladies and gentlemen. I don't want you to notice me at all. I'm not here. That's what the silent service is all about. We're not here. You don't hear us. You don't see us. The next minute you're
What's
going along. Next minute your ship shudders and goes straight to the bottom. That's how you know we were there.
see? That's
Okay.
that's the thing. I mean, I've
So
seen
yes.
in a lot of war movies the sailors at the port and they've got the hat on, the navy hat, the white. You know the one I'm talking
Oh,
about.
you mean like this?
That's it. Aye, that's it. That's it. Yep.
Cracker
Yep.
Jack, right?
Yeah.
They called it the
Popeyes.
Dixie Cup or the Cracker Jack hat. That's right. Now it's pretty white. What they would do sometimes they
As
dye them blue. They dye them blue.
yeah.
They take some Rit ink dye. They go into the galley and have a big pot of water. My father told me this, and they'd put a couple ink pens in there and dye this gray or blue. So it would kind of match this uniform because this is a work uniform anyway. This would get full
Mm-hmm.
of diesel fuel and grease and sweat, and you wouldn't wash this thing. You'd roll up your sleeves, so you'd kind of look like, I
Aye,
got a
exactly.
job to do here.
Exactly.
And
That's
instead, you'd be
exactly.
drinking. Here you go. This is this one actually was on board the cod, and the director gave this to me. It's dated 1942. So this is called a fingerless mug because if
Yeah.
you're doing watch, you can't put your finger. So it's cold. So you'd go like this. And you've seen pictures of the sailors on board American battleships, all covered with crud and dirt. And it reminds me of one, and he's like this.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only thing he had from home, a little coffee. And in
Yeah.
Great Britain, tea, probably Taifu and other uh, types of
Yes.
tea, the gold Taifu tea. And they would drink from something. I'm sure you've seen this. The good old, this
The
is an
tin
original
cup.
British tea mug.
Mm-hmm.
Cheers.
That
And I
might
could
be some
say,
age.
huh? Oh, it is. This is original. I've got a collection. This is an original World War One or two British tea mug. Then they switched to the brown ones in 1944. But the
Yeah.
first ones were like this, and this is the real McCoy. This came from across the pond because I'm also a
Yes.
UK reenactor. But to answer your question, here I am, minding my own business, sitting at my computer a couple of years ago, and I knew someone was watching me. And I looked around because when I went down south to do Civil War reenacting, I came up. Okay, here. I got to change hats again. One moment, please.
What's that? You're saying that, Michael? They were even used by officers. Uh, yeah, you see the ex-military shops. You can buy the tin cups. I don't know if they're still the same as them, but I've seen them.
Okay, now,
Well, you're in for a treat now, guys. He's getting all his uniforms out.
okay, now I've got my four button sack coat on. This is what they used in the American Civil War. This is your winter, spring, summer, and fall uniform. 100% wool. Keeps you
What?
cool in the winter,
Yeah.
cool in the summer, warm in the winter because it wicks the moisture away from your body.
Mm-hmm.
The common question is, are you hot in that uniform? And I say no. And being a pioneer, you could see there's two crossed axes and a maul.
Mm-hmm.
Blue for infantry, and I have my favorite turkey feather over here from Freddie the Friendly Turkey. Okay, he wasn't too friendly because we ate him for Thanksgiving. Okay, so I'm sitting here back from Gettysburg. Right behind me, you see that bookcase?
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Georgia, I brought some fireworks back from Georgia. My bed's over here, and I'm laying in bed, and all of a sudden I hear, loud as a bell, bang, 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 in a Confederate twanged accent. And it
Yeah.
came directly from the fireworks. And I looked up at it, and it sounded like it came through a long tube, like if someone had a long corrugated tube, like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I said, and I knew what it was. someone followed me up. Some
Yeah.
soul followed me up
Hmm.
from the south. And I looked up and I said, okay. I said, you had your fun. That was pretty funny, wasn't it? You woke me up there. I said, this is where I live, up in Ohio. I hope you enjoyed the trip now, but I want you to know something. You're going to have to go home. I really, you can't stay here. And so, could I ask you, young man, to go home? That was a funny trick. I enjoyed that. I hope you did. Now,
Hmm.
this is where I live. You could see what time this is. I'm a human like you, but you need to go home. Okay. And I never had that problem again. So that's the first
Yeah.
question of an
That's
attachment to
amazing.
something. The second one was I'm sitting here. Okay. So now I've gone from World War II to a Civil War. Now I'm going to go back to World War II again.
Oh, see, guys, the guests that I get for the show, just for you guys. What we were saying in the chat, Michael, they were used by officers. Drew, right? What's that? Let's have a look here. You like that one, Drew?
Oh, what do you do with a drunken sailor? What do you do with a drunken sailor? What do you do with a drunken sailor early in the morning?
See,
Way
you can.
hey, up she rises. Way hey, up she rises. Way hey, up she rises early in the morning. Oh, what a minute, baby, pick up.
What's this one?
Oh, here
Oh,
I
that's a
am.
good one.
Longest way up, shortest way down. Longest way up, shortest way down. At ease, privates.
Is that the Dad's Army one, or is that just the normal military?
This is the Home Guard,
Yeah, yeah,
Royal West Kent Regiment. You see, I was lorry driver in Manchester before the war, and they sent me to London. I'd sit on tops of the cathedrals at night and chuck off the embers, because you see, they're made of timber. They burn straight away. So we'd sit on tops of cathedrals at night and watch the buzz bombs. It would drop his buzz bombs as the other lads was fighting the fires, with the stirrup pumps and all that. Well, I kind of enjoyed that a bit, doing my bit, because I did fight the Fuzzy Wuzzies up in the Sudan. I fought with General Kirchner, and Kirchner would say, boys, give them the cold steel. We'd say, why, General Kirchner? He said, because they don't like it up them. They do not like it up them. They do not abide it up them. That's what General Kirchner said. So we'd sit on tops of the cathedrals, but I never did get a job driving Lord John Manchester as good as that job. But cheers, lads.
Dad's Army was a great TV series, and I can remember watching the ones in black and white.
Yeah.
What would you say was the best? Would you say the colour versions or the black and
Oh,
white versions?
I served with Corporal Jones. If you know Corporal Jones, he was that.
Go on.
Yeah, and he was in the war. Yeah, now I guess he's a butcher now, isn't he? Yeah, he was a butcher back then too, but we won't get into that. So as I'm sitting here at my computer, someone was watching me, and I was doing World War II British. I looked, and I saw a gentleman in battle dress uniform with kind of a fuzzy face in color, and I could see through him. And I thought I was hallucinating again, being a reenactor and all this, my head full of all these things.
Yeah.
And I saw him standing up, and he got on all four hands and knees to try to avoid me. And I said, I'm not afraid. You could stand up. And it stood up. And I said, I have to apologize to you. I said, you probably come from the closet, and I've got some of your kit in there. And if that's true, I said, I didn't know. I didn't know. So, could you forgive me? And you probably have to go to the light too. And so I said that, and I never had a problem after that too. So,
Yeah.
you know, I also volunteered, and then after a while worked at an antique shop in for a friend, and they had antiques from all over. And out of the corner of my eye, I'd see things moving left and right
Yeah.
all the time. Now, my friend Michael McNeil came back from a reenactment up here in Conneaut, and we slept in a home that was built in 1798. That's probably new for UK standards, but it's old by United States standards. And I've had paranormal experiences in that home. And I'd be going like this. And I apologize for my. I'd be going like this up in the attic.
Very good.
Okay,
Very, very good.
no applause, just money. Just kidding. No, but anyway, so so what happened was I I was at a paranormal investigation there, and the investigators said they heard tapping, toe tapping, because I came in and I said,
Yeah.
I'm a schoolmaster from Cleveland. May I kindly ask your permission to play a tune on my mouth organ? This is a German harmonica. It was invented in 1820 and mass produced by Johann Hohner of Germany.
Mm-hmm.
The the civilians from Germany brought it to the United States, and now we called it the good old Yankee mouth harp
Mm-hmm.
or mouth organ. Well, I was playing that, and they heard someone dancing, like tapping their foot, and I've seen, oh, well, things out of the corner of my eye. And once I heard a woman go about 5 feet from me, and there was no one there. Well, Michael and I, after a reenactment, before he drove back to Norfolk, Virginia, are sleeping in front of this fireplace. And I'm sorry, I do snore. So I'm snoring, sawing logs back and forth. And as I'm snoring, Michael was half awake. I probably kept him awake too. And he needed to sleep so he could go back home. So I'm laying there in front of the fireplace, and he hears a very soft woman's voice say, "Turn, turn." So what did I do? I turned and I stopped snoring. And Michael looked down and he laughed. He went back to sleep. Well, Michael told me this in the morning when I woke up, and I said, "You're not kidding." Well, they had a favorite horse, a buggy horse there too. And as I was working one summer, these two girls come up. They said, "Can we take pictures of this place?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" She says, "Go with Frank. He knows the history of the place." So I told him a little bit, hoping they'd buy something, you know.
Yeah.
And I said, "This is where a horse was buried." I saw this for myself. They took a picture of the digital camera. It was an Olympus digital camera. And she goes,
Mm-hmm.
and she turned and showed it to me. And there's a horse standing there with his head turned to one side, and it had white feet and brown and white down its nose, down its forehead. And she was shocked. And I said, "How did you do that?" And you could see the horse standing right there. And I saw that. Okay. Then she took a picture of me toward the house, but there was a window of the door of the house. And in the window's reflection, there was a woman, a young woman, leaned in like this, looking at us with one of those hats, those big hats that's tied underneath like an Easter
Yeah.
bonnet, a big white hat. And I saw that picture too.
That's
And
that's it's
so,
amazing. I know.
yeah, I mean, but the icing on the cake was when I was at Gettysburg for I believe it was 150th. Now, I had lost my job, and I was in between jobs at the time. So I thought I'll go early and avoid the rush. So this is Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, on the dates that the battle happened, exactly 150 years ago after that. And I'm at the Gettysburg Battlefield Resort, and it's at 1960 Emmitsburg Road. It's a private campground. And they invited us to come by there so we could entertain the campers. And they let us camp there for free. And we could take warm showers. We could use the swimming pool on a hot July sweaty day. So, of course, we're going to do that. So they put us up. I was the first one there on June 30th. Well, I'm there starting my fire. And I took a can of fire starter and I put a little bit on and it wouldn't light. I said, "This is cheap stuff." So I poured a little bit more on it and I lit it. I went through a book of matches. Finally, I took out my cigarette lighter,
Mm.
and I think I poured the whole can on top of it. And you would have thought it was water. I couldn't light it. I said, "What's wrong with this?" And she said, "You're a Yankee. This is where the Confederates died here. This was called South Cavalry Field, and this is where North Carolinians died. This was a staging area for horses. And before the battle, there was canister fired through here, so anything here would have died of shot."
Yeah,
And I said,
that's
"Well, they probably don't know that my dad's father's family was from Midlands, England. They're from the Midlands. They come here the fifth wave. They were Phillips, Kings, and Morleys, and they settled what is now Tennessee. My dad's father's family was from Rotterdam, Holland. They came here in 1700. They settled what is now southern Ontario, Toronto, Canada. So my father's family were the first white settlers of Toronto. My dad's mother's family were the first white settlers of the southern part of this country. My mother's family, I'm actually a descendant, and it's been proven, of Charlemagne on my mother's side. I'm Byzantine Greek and Italian and 12% French, and probably even goes back to Turkey, possibly, probably about 4,000 years ago, Mount Ararat area. So anyhow, um, once I said that I had relatives who fought out of Paris, Texas, Franklin Street, I fell back. It burst into flame. The fire just burst into flame like that. And the lady standing there going, "See, I told you." And I'm like, "What?" So I couldn't figure that out. So that night, something really strange happened. I'm playing my harmonica, trying to be a. Oh, I really look like George Mannering, don't I? And actually, when I was a little heavier and I had a
all it's
mustache,
missing is
I did him.
all it's
Stupid
missing is the
boy.
glasses. Is the glasses. But listen, I've only got about maybe 8 minutes left of the show, but keep telling them some more before the show ends.
Yes. Okay. So wait on that story. Then you're saying, or continue?
Was that? I just continue that story. We'll
Okay.
end it with that story.
Oh, okay. How much more money? How much more time have we got?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay. So so I'm sitting around the campfire, I'm playing my harmonica, and I hear like a Jew's harp going. That's the little harp that you put and it goes twang, 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 twang. And I'd stop playing and I'd go like this. I'd go like this. And I'd hear twang, 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 twang. I'd say, "Okay, who's doing that now?" And I'd hear it 4 feet from me. So I walked over 4 feet and there's no one there. And this went on. So I kind of got spooked. So then I started talking out loud and I told him who I was and what year it was and why I was there. And I heard a lot of walking around my head. So I finally put my harmonica to sleep and I was getting ready to go to bed myself to turn in. So I lay in my bunk in my A-frame tent
Yeah.
and I'm ready to go to bed. And I have my feet crossed like this. So I'm laying back and my feet are, crossed, fully clothed with my shoes on. And all of a sudden I feel my foot moved like that. And I go like this. There's nobody there because I had the front of the tent open for ventilation.
Yeah.
And I crossed my other foot over again. And it happened again. I'm like, so I'm trying to ignore it. So I turn over the other way and I cross my foot again. At that point, very gently, not mean or nasty, it felt like someone who was kind. Gently took my foot, slowly lifted it up and dropped it. And as my foot was going up, I looked down and I see my foot going up and falling down. I'm like, that's it. out of here. I'm done. I don't know what's going on here. I'm out of here. So as I was looking around thinking how I'm going to get out, walking through this to get to my car on the other side, my pickup truck, wasn't an option. As I looked out my tent, I could see the tree line in the moonlight. And in the tree line, it looked like there were soldiers on their hands and knees with their muskets. And every now and then they'd stand up and kind of creep forward in that tree line and then go back down again. And they had like a rough line. They were trying to keep a line going, but it was rough because of the terrain. I thought, oh no. So then I looked where they had the salt lights burning in the front. And I had a pair of binoculars. I took them out and I looked through those and I saw three soldiers wearing a tan uniform. They looked like they were 12 years old or 13, clean shaven kids. The one kid in the middle was wounded. He wasn't well, and they were like supporting him on either side, and they kind of like drifted. And I couldn't see from the knees down. From the knees down, it was like invisible, but I could see from the knees up. And it's like, well, I said the word that starts with an S and ends with a T, as HI in the middle, and I said it about 1,000 times 1 second to myself. I was like, I'm out of here. And I thought, what's going to be open this time of the night? What am I going to do? I got all my gear here. Where's my money? I'm scrambling to get out of there. Well, I finally decided wherever I go, I'm in Gettysburg. I can't run away from this. So I said, I guess I'll have to tough it out. So I laid there all night long. I didn't get a lick of sleep. In the morning, finally the sun came up and I hear walk, 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 walk. And I put my hold out of my tent and I went, I see a reenactor. He's got an Iron Brigade stiff hardy hat on, 42 Springfield musket at right shoulder shift, wearing a sack coat like I did. And I remember I watched him 1, 2, 3, 4. His arm swung 4 times. I said, oh, finally a human being. I said, hi. I said, I'm Frank from Ohio. You're not going to believe the night I had last night. And he looked at me and he smiled. I saw the smile on his face. As soon as he turned his head and smiled at me, he was in mid-stride.
Disappeared.
Disappeared in front, right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the only conclusion I have is that I've now lost my mind, and I was the strangest emotions. I was angry, I was mad, I was sad, and I was confused at the same time. So I threw some clothes on and I went to the front gate and I said, I want to see who's in charge of here right now. I said, what's wrong? I want to see who's in charge of here right now. She said, did you have a problem? I said, yes, I do have a problem. Says, what? I said, I want to talk to who's in charge of here. That's all. She says, well, I'm in charge. I said, what happened? Did you have? I said, yeah. So she turns around, she takes out this leather book and she opens it and she takes a pen. She goes, what happened? I said, what are you doing there? She said, we are not the National Park Service. We do not have the stance that there are no such thing as spirits or apparitions or ghosts.
Yeah.
This happens every night. What happened, sir?
Yeah.
And I told her, and she wrote it down. I said, what are you going to do with that? She goes, that's for my records. I said, what am I supposed to do now? She goes, well, I said, I didn't say there's ghosts here. I said, there's human beings here. And how could I help them? That's the first thing I wanted to help them, because I got the impression that they all died together. They were all from the same town.
Yeah.
Somehow in my mind, I was seeing that they were friends, same neighborhood, whatever.
Yeah.
And they said they were going to stick together. And I think they got hit and killed pretty fast.
Yes.
And I smelled tobacco smoke too. I saw walking. I remember I took out my Polaroid camera and I still have a picture of it. And there's a electric blue light going through the middle of the back of my tent. Someone said, it's a vortex. I said, what's that? They said, that's how they get in and out. That's
Yeah.
just like you're in a curtain and they go like this and go around
Well,
and they go back in
what we'll
again.
need, what we'll need to do is get you back maybe next week if you want, and you can tell others about your ghostly experiences.
Ah,
But
sure.
I'm afraid we've came to the end of the show. I'll talk to you after I shut the live down.
Okay.
But listen, guys. Thank you all for coming. Frank, would you like to say anything before I go?
Well, take care of yourself. Take care of each other. God bless you. Thank you for the privilege of speaking to you tonight. And I just want to say this whole thing is about honoring
Mhm.
our family members who've gone before us, whether it's 100
Yes.
years, 500 years from now, or yesterday. Don't forget the sacrifices that our people made for us and try to make them proud of yourself. And just be happy and live a good life and help each other.
Well, you heard it, guys. We'll probably see you soon in our next live. Catch you later, guys. Bye.